everybody. I'm Stuart Smith. I'm CEO of smallcapvoice.com, and I appreciate you joining us here today for CoroWare's Investor and Shareholder Q&A session. We're going to be joined by the CEO of CoroWare, and that's Lloyd Spencer. The company's traded on the OTC under the ticker symbol COWI. You can also learn more about the company at its website. That's CoroWare.com, COROWARE.com. Now, you can see the forward-looking statements on your screen now, but this investor call may contain certain forward-looking statements within the meaning of Section 27A of the Securities Act of 1933. Now, the full forward-looking statement, once again, is on your screen and available in the company's filings, the company's press releases. Very easy for you to find. Go read it there. With that, let me introduce onto the call today Lloyd Spencer. Lloyd, thanks for making the time for us.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Stuart.
Hey, Lloyd, let's start off with opening statements and kind of a state of the union for where the company's at today.
Yeah. So I think when some of the investors here probably came to know the company, it would have been in early 2021, but there are quite a few investors who go back before that. So 2021 has been a year of really bringing back CoroWare and COWI from a rather difficult set of circumstances. But I really have to thank the many loyal investors who really made this possible. What we first did during the early part of the year was to essentially bring the company current with its filings so that we could file with OTC markets. And as many of your viewers have seen, we filed a Form 1A, or Reg A as it's called. And I'm very happy to say that the company is now qualified in a couple states, which means that we can now begin working with investors in earnest. With that said, even before we went down this path, I had been talking with some various universities about a new area of recycling, not in the traditional recycling method or manner, but instead we're taking plastics and organic wastes and then really repurposing them with either chemically or more than that even, to produce products that could be value added. And that's where I pursued a relationship working with Oxford University, which is proven already to be very positive. And we will begin now getting going in earnest now that we have investors to help me get there.
Well, very good. If you look at the About section in any press release for your company, it talks about the location being headquartered in Woodinville, Washington. Let's set the record straight here, because investors want to know, is there a production facility built there? Apparently, physical location, there's some questions regarding that.
Understood. So Woodinville right now is, I'll call it the corporate headquarters, which is where I am. And what I am doing now is we are setting up our first research and development group in the United Kingdom. So the work that's going to be starting in earnest is going to be around the Oxford, United Kingdom area. And the reason for that is that the people who will be working with me on this are going to be working out of Oxford in a research and development capacity. After we get that initial R&D facility going and we get our processes beginning to understand all the scaling up required, that's when we go and we expand into facilities, most likely in United Kingdom first, but also in the United States. We've had many inquiries about us putting facilities even in Asia. We haven't made any decisions on those fronts, but I most certainly can say that we are now in the planning stages for getting that research and development group established in the United Kingdom up in Oxford very, very quickly now.
Well, very good. Then you talk about getting established in Oxford. What is the current employee status then for the company?
Right. Right now, the only employees are myself, and we have multiple contractors working with me who are working on the financials, who are working on what do I call it? A little bit on the marketing front, and as well on all the filings. The next step is going to be in hiring those individuals, either as contractors or employees over in the United Kingdom.
I should state that a solicitation for questions was put out via social media by the company as well as Small Cap Voice. So some of these questions may be redundant. I preface this next question with that statement because you did touch on this, but is your company's focus purely domestic or is it international? And I noticed, obviously you're talking about Oxford, you just mentioned Asia. So I would assume you have a global perspective.
Most definitely. From moment one, when I looked at the problems related to plastics, the problem is global. It's worldwide. I would say that we had our first inquiries about working with us to supply us as much plastic as we want from the Netherlands. And as well in Asia, called the South Pacific part of Asia. So we have no end of suppliers of plastic that want to bring that to us. The very first step, as I said, is in getting these processes, which are going to be using, as some of you saw in the papers that we put out, as it relates to using microwave catalysis. So using microwaves to break down these plastics into components and then extracting carbon-based nanotubes and other amorphous carbon, as it's called, and as well as hydrogen. And I think it was the hydrogen that caught people's ears at first, which is valuable unto itself. But as it turns out, one of the valuable products that comes out of this are carbon nanotubes, which incidentally can be used in batteries in the electric vehicle arena. So it ends up benefiting the environment in two very substantial ways.
So is that what led you to the carbon hydrogen space, this surplus and this opportunity to help the environment in multiple facilities?
Well, during the past, I guess it was 2 years, I've been working with various companies to help them on different projects. And one of the interesting ones was in the produce business. And one of the things I noted was in the wholesale produce business, the abundance of plastic. And the abundance of plastic used to wrap, these pallets. And when you look at a truck and it's full of pallets, and you look at multiple trucks all full of pallets, all wrapped in plastic, and then you look at the other food plastics, for our everyday purchase of retail foods, it becomes abundantly clear that there's a plastics issue here. And when I started looking at what are the possible ways that you could recycle that plastic, some of the reality of recycling plastics is the majority of it doesn't get recycled. So I started looking into what are the possible solutions, and I looked into various chemical recycling. They weren't as attractive as I was hoping, and also economically sustainable. That's one of the key issues around plastic recycling. And then I happened upon a paper from Peter Edwards and the Oxford team as it relates to the use of microwaves. After speaking with Peter, he and I instantly came to I think a good common understanding that we could not only technically solve this problem, but economically solve this problem so you can build a sustainable business. So it was really recognizing there was a problem to start with and then searching for reasonable solutions and even better, economically sustainable solutions. And I have to say, Peter Edwards and I, we've had a very good rapport. He and I both went to Cornell University, so that was a nice positive. But we didn't know each other back at Cornell, but we have a shared experience there, and we both have a shared passion for solving this problem of taking plastics out of the waste stream, putting them into, I'll call it the recycle stream, but doing it in a way that can be economically very positive.
Clearly, you have some knowledgeable investors, shareholders, parties interested in your company, because this next question is multifaceted, but it's an excellent question. So I'm going to read it verbatim. Moving forward, everything, will it be orbiting around green energy and the carbon footprint? What is COWI doing in that field? We understand the concept of upcycling green waste, but there are several methods to this process. What is then going to set COWI apart?
Yeah, so very good question. And first and foremost, I think the company is going to be about taking organic wastes, not just plastic, but any organic wastes, and then being able to extract the value out of those. What most people don't know is that when you look at most plastics, you end up seeing a lot of carbon. So here's a good example of what a carbon. It's a group of carbons all linked together, and this is what plastics often look like, only much bigger, of course. But you'll notice that there's lots of black where the carbons are and a lot of white where the hydrogens are. Both those are extremely valuable if you can extract those economically. I wouldn't say that it's only going to be plastics, but I would say that it's going to be many organic waste products. So, for example, could it be organic wastes like food waste? Yep, that's an organic waste. Could one use this process? Maybe not. So we would look at other processes for doing that. But that's where the university relationships come to play. And that's one of the things we'll see from working with Peter Edwards and myself. We're looking at putting together an advisory team, a science advisory board that will help us identify, here's the problem at hand, whether it's organic waste like plastics, like foods, maybe it's even waste that goes, into sewage plants. There's sludge that comes out of that. So there are many waste products that are organic. And then you look for the ways that you can go ahead and extract that value. I'll call it chemically, if you want to refer to it that way, but I'll call it in ways that you can extract the carbon value, the hydrogen value, and maybe even metals, for example. So there's really no end of waste to work with. That much is certain. But there are a limited number of ways to extract the value, and there are even more, smaller number of ways to extract the value economically so you can make it sustainable. And that is going to be really the guiding light of the company, is to look for those waste streams, identify the ways you can actually get the value out of it technically, and then find the ways that work economically.
Well, let's move back to the relationship with Oxford. To what extent right now is their involvement, the team that's at Oxford, and then also the Oxford patent? Is it currently exclusive to CoroWare? Can you update us on that as well?
Yeah, so the patents are not exclusive, but the patents are right now part of how we're going to conduct our business. Working with Peter and his team, we are now in the early process of getting the UK research team up and going. And so I would say that you can see this in the Form 1A, in the Reg A, that we will have an operation up and going by the end of the year. Before that, I hope. And then we anticipate getting our processes well understood in the early part of the year. And then we should be able to be generating revenues by mid next year, or hopefully before that. It's one thing to be able to work with the team to show that you can extract the carbons, the hydrogens, and other things. It's another thing to be able to purify them and get them in market readiness. So for example, carbon nanotubes. Once you have carbon nanotubes, you have to purify them and clean them, separate them from the other carbon products. When you can then separate those and you can, we'll call package them so that they are ready for customers, then you start working with customers to make sure that those carbon products meet the expectations and needs of our customers. So for example, battery manufacturers, that's one type. It could also be, for example, in the tire business. Tire companies are researching the use of carbon nanotubes. So that's another possibility. Even, for example, there are companies building road paving materials using carbon nanotubes. It's in the experimental stage, but those are the kinds of customers we'll be pursuing and working closely with. Once we get that stream, if you will, all the way from waste product to carbon and hydrogen for that matter, and then put it in a form that the customers can use and we can sell it to them, then we have a sustainable pipeline, and then the business will be up and going. And once we get that understood in the UK, we have definite interest in Asia, as I said, and I can certainly think of 2 or 3 places in the United States that would like to have us be working on this as well.
So there's a document available that breaks down the potential sales of both hydrogen and carbon nanotubes,
right,
known as CNTs,
yeah.
from using the tech here with CNTs far beating out hydrogen. Will your interest remain in both carbon nanotubes and hydrogen?
Yeah, you know, if there's one thing I've learned in business, whether whether that was you know, through my days at at Microsoft, Sun Microsystems and Newbridge, it is that you always look at as many revenue streams as possible and you prioritize them. So even though hydrogen may not be as economically, per kilogram, it's not priced as highly as carbon nanotubes. It still has an economic value. We may end up using the hydrogen internally for our own processes, for example, working with hydrogen cells to generate power, or we may sell it externally. We don't know yet. We're going to see how much hydrogen we can get, eventually per ton of plastic, and we're going to look at that economic value, and then we'll make a decision based on that.
So in this market, carbon nanotubes have had their ups and downs, we can say. It might be an understatement. With the struggles of production and getting it to market, is the tech any different here?
No, the technology is very similar. There are many ways to get carbon nanotubes. I do think that this process of working with the microwave catalysis that the Oxford team has come up with is a very economically viable way of doing it. There are other ways that are more involved. Some of them even use carbon dioxide, for example, to produce carbon nanotubes. But it's a very energy intensive process, and those may not be as economically interesting. So what I saw was you really need a very carbon rich material to start with. Well, that certainly works with plastics. And then you can very easily extract the carbon and the hydrogen. The next part of it, though, which is your point is well taken. Once you have carbon nanotubes, there are many flavors, I would call it. You have single walled, you have double walled, you have multi-walled. They all have their value in different markets. And what you have to do is you have to extract them, you have to purify them, and then you have to package them, if you will. And that is going to be common to all the producers of carbon nanotubes.
So this is not the first venture for CoroWare, and this investor would like to know, what is your confidence level at this time?
Yeah, so he's right. So when we started this venture back in, I guess it was 2006, when the private company CoroWare was acquired by Innova Holdings a long time ago, we had a business around robotics, and we had a good business with the what do I call it, the universities especially, which was a good business, no question about it. We also had a business with offering consulting services to a wide range of robotics companies and even IT companies, and we were doing work with what do I call it, 3D visualization, augmented reality, for example. Those are good businesses, but they were also very competitive, and they had margin, gross margin issues as time went on. This business, having done a fair amount of research into the amount of, I'll call it the amount of the energy that goes into it, the amount of economic value that comes out of it, we did a reasonably good assessment of what the gross margin would look like on this business, and it's very good. And so I have a high degree of confidence that this is going to be a profitable venture. Moreover, I have a phenomenally gifted team technically to work with over in Oxford. That raises my confidence greatly. It really does. So I think it's going to be a good combination of bringing, the capital to the table, bringing, I'll call it the financial capital to the table, bringing the intellectual capital to the table. And I think we have some very good business people behind this, and we're going carefully. We're going one step at a time, which is really necessary. And that goes back to some of my training, during the past 20 years, really, which is to evaluate one step at a time. Don't rush into things too quickly. And I think we've done some good homework in this area.
So then if the stars align and in a perfect setup, how far are you willing to take this company? In essence, I'm asking, what is the end goal then?
Yeah, so I think this company is going to be a remarkably interesting one in terms of getting a sustainable and very profitable business off the ground that can be cloned, if you will, in different regions. So once we get the I'll call it the production level processes put together, working with the vendors, for example, that make some of the equipment, we have to piece it all together. We have to put I'll call it the pipeline, if you will, from plastic to nanotube or plastic to hydrogen. Once we put all that together and we can demonstrate that it's economically working in the UK, it can be very easily cloned and brought to different regions around the world. In addition, I will say we are going to look at acquisitions of companies that are like-minded. It doesn't have to be exactly this kind of technology. So, for example, it could be companies that are taking plastics as an example, and then producing. One company is producing bricks and tiles. It's not as a high-tech solution, but it is a technical solution unto its own. And those kinds of product or companies, I should say, we'll be looking at. We're effectively looking for people who have a shared passion for taking organic waste streams out of the trash cycle and then generating economic value out of that, so that not only does it solve a pollution problem, but also that it's sustainable, so you can continue doing it and not worry about, gee, do I have to keep financing this? That's really the kind of people we're looking for. And quite frankly, there's a lot of young people who have this kind of passion. And those are the kind of people I'm looking for, is people, we'll call it young at heart or just young in themselves, who have a passion for solving these kinds of problems.
Well, then it sounds like the company is still in a conceptual phase. How close are you then to selling products?
Without a doubt, we're, I would say, about 3/4 away from selling products. So, on a larger scale. So if you wanted to call it a year, I'm fine with that. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that, revenues are right around the corner. What I will say is that we, now that we have the ability to raise some financing, and now we can begin building up our first subsidiary in the UK. Then we can start doing a little bit of work in the United States. We'll basically kind of go stepwise to growing the business. It's a method, it's a method of building a business that I think I learned back really as early as the 1990s, which is don't go too fast. Make sure you look ahead, because if you go a little too fast and you don't really understand all your risks, that you end up in a bad spot and you have to go backtrack and do it again. So it may seem a little slow at times to some folk, but on the other hand, I think that they will find that this is going to be a sustainably responsible company, but as well one that can be very profitable because we've actually thought things through. And as well, as I said, with acquisitions, that can change things around too. We're gonna look for acquisitions that are going to be, that are cash positive, so we're not, starting on the wrong foot. But it doesn't have to be a huge company either. So it can be something where the company has a proven technology, a proven business model, and we can help it grow. But again, it's going to be not in the traditional waste management areas by any means. It's going to be more in the area of repurposing waste creatively and sustainably.
Well, you mentioned 3/4 to a year. You also mentioned steps in this process. So
yes.
If you would kind of elaborate on then the roadmap and the steps in each phase, and maybe tell us where you expect to see the company 1 year from now.
Yeah. So what we'll see in what our plan is to first get that that research and development group up and going in the coming quarter. Then to begin scaling up a little bit in the following quarter, and then be ready for our first customers by mid next year. As it goes with all research and development, things generally take about 1 year. It takes time to go do your early research and development, like prototyping we were just talking about. It takes another quarter or two sometimes to be able to ramp it up so that you now have it in a productizable manner. And I call that sort of the alpha testing area. So I would call the research and development and alpha testing will take somewhere between 6 and possibly 9 months. And then you start your beta testing process, which is now you're involving your customers. You're not just testing your ability to produce something, you're also testing your ability to sell and support your products to your customers. And that's generally what takes a year. So it's a very traditional R&D cycle from what I can see.
Well, let's change gears. Let's talk a little bit about the cap structure of the companies, sure. Some of the technicals in regards to the trading of the stock. This investor wants to know, TD Ameritrade still has a trading restriction on the stock, despite the company currently being in good standing with OTC markets and the SEC. Is this something that the company itself can reach out to TD Ameritrade and see what the issue is?
Now, first, I want to thank investors for even asking those kind of questions. The company can reach out to the various channels to communicate with TD Ameritrade and other folks. It's not typically through the SEC. It's usually through another organization called FINRA or with the broker-dealers themselves. So that's one of the paths that I will follow up on that. What I'll generally say is that and it's a good question as to what makes a stock tradable on one platform versus another. And it really comes down to the compliance group within each broker network. And different companies have different standards by which they determine whether a company should be tradable or not. And I would certainly say that CoroWare, COWI, has come a very long way from its early days in January of this year to being accepted by quite a few of the trading platforms. That being said, you're right, we are in good stead with both the SEC and with OTC markets. And then one of the next steps is making sure that we are in good stead with the various compliance groups at different brokerages. And the broker dealers are one of the means of us communicating that. So what I do typically is, once I understand there's a potential issue, then I go ahead and I start working on that. And you can, and I will be following up on that very question about TD Ameritrade.
So I'm going to combine the next couple of questions into one question and make clear to the investors and interested parties that, sometimes we may not be asking your question verbatim, but it's all kind of encompassed under this umbrella. So when will the dilution stop? And is there a plan for a share reduction? One way of doing that is a reverse split. So talk to us again, cap structure for the company.
Yeah. So because in the early days of whether it was Nova Holdings or Nova Robotics or whether it was CoroWare, some of the debt that was originally there back in 2006 was rather detrimental. We'll call it detrimental to the health of the company's stock. And a company it goes ahead and it gets into investment vehicles that it thinks it can work with at the time, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And so to try to work one's way out, some of the debt that was there was not very helpful to the company's equity and shareholders. So what we've done is, as you saw with the Yorkville agreement that we just did some months ago, I was able to work with Yorkville to put a finite number of shares to the debt that was outstanding. And I'm happy to say that Yorkville has done some conversions out, a substantial number of conversions out. Once I see that is complete, I am working with other debt holders to begin negotiating a mutually satisfactory way that either they can get a finite number of shares or that they can get paid back in some fraction in cash, so that as a result, the shareholders are not going to be taking the brunt of it like they were in the past. So the question is, when will the dilution stop? Well, first, when you're working with a Reg A like we're doing, in effect, what the company is doing is it's selling shares to qualified investors at a fixed price. So there's going to be dilution from that. However, in that case, it's actually a good dilution because you're using your equity wisely in order to take that cash and establish operations and to building your R&D pipeline that will yield revenues. That's really what you're looking for, is the equity being used wisely. Some of the cash coming out of that can also be used to pay down some of the, at a fraction of the debt load. Some of that convertible debt can be eliminated altogether. So that will be a way that will benefit shareholders greatly. Once I see that that there is a low risk of this of dilution, shall we say, and it will go ahead and we will see shares being issued for the Reg A. But once it gets to the point where it's very predictable, I will feel comfortable doing a reverse split to go bring the share count back to something, in something more rational, I'll call it that. And at a share price, it's more rational. So that therefore the various trading platforms will also be, and the compliance groups will be also much more comfortable with the stock. So I would just ask people to be a little patient as they evaluate this, but I just want you to know that I do think long and hard about when it's time to do that sort of thing, and I will and I will definitely communicate as we're nearing that as to what the plans are.
Well, very good. What about a board of directors? Will the company be trying to establish a board of directors here in the near future?
Yeah. So, in the early stages of getting a company up and going, having a board of director of one is, it makes things a little easier. But on the other hand, you want a board of directors that can offer, first of all, guidance, but also the ability to bring in new investors and new ideas for growing the business. You will see that happen. The first step you'll see is with the UK group, you will see a board of directors for the subsidiary. So we'll see some announcements around that. You will also see a board of advisors, a science advisory board, if you will. And so you'll see those happen as well. But generally speaking, with a board of directors, I look for two things. Can the person help grow the business, either through relationships with other companies, or for that matter, relationships with other investors? And which brings me to number two, which is the ability to attract investors that will help the company grow. You're looking not only for investors that look at it technically of can I trade the stock? That's all fine, and that's good that you're bringing in investment, but also looking for investors that look a little further down the road, say 2 to 3 years down the road. Those are the kind of investors that I'll be seeking, and it's still a little too early to do that right now, but it will happen.
Well, you answered one of the questions in the following question I'll present to you. Will the company then be seeking out government programs and, as you just mentioned, institutional, educated, if you will, investors that will partner with the company shoulder to shoulder? So government programs, do you know, are they available? Will the company be seeking them out?
Yes.
And will the company also be seeking out additional institutional investors for additional funding?
Yes. Okay. So on the first one with the government, undoubtedly, I'm already looking at a couple of programs in the UK, but there are also multiple programs in the United States as it relates to plastic wastes. I'm also looking at different parts of the United States that have different kind of plastic problems. And so you bet I'm looking at all of that. And those areas where I see a city or town or whatever that has the possibility of establishing a center for doing this kind of recycling. That's one of the things I'm looking for. But as well, I'm looking for those government programs that want to invest in those companies that are going to eliminate the plastic problem, but also bring jobs to an area. Those are the two things I'm looking for, because those are the things I certainly believe in. And your point about looking for those investors who are going to be partnering with this, undoubtedly. There are a number of groups, whether they are in the form of grants or in the form of investors themselves, that have a vested interest in seeing this kind of a company succeed. I've already talked with a couple of them. It's in the early days yet for those groups, but I will say that we've already heard some interest as of today.
Well, the final question, Lloyd, is regarding what we're doing right now. Will there be more interactive Q&A sessions with yourself and other members of the team in the future?
Yes, well, undoubtedly. I actually enjoy this process of taking these kinds of questions and responding back to them. Especially, I think, to help clarify, for example, even how the Reg A process works. That's one of the most common questions I get is how does this process work? So I look forward to working with Stuart on that, on answering these very specific kinds of questions, but also maybe even more the general questions of, how does a Reg A work with respect to issuance of shares, and what's the impact going to be, and how does one eventually make that decision of, is it time to do a reverse split, or is it time to do a purchase of shares back? What is that process? And I'm looking forward to doing that with you, Stuart.
Well, very good. Thank you, Lloyd, for your time today. And investors, we did make this open via Twitter. You can contact the company, send your questions in on their social media handles, specifically Twitter, and Small Cap Voice as well, specifically on Twitter. Both websites have a contact us format, so we have an online form where you can send questions in as well. Obviously, by the amount of questions we received and the length of today's first Q&A, you had no problem reaching us. We really appreciate your interest and your time in sending those questions, crafting them for Lloyd. And Lloyd, of course, we appreciate your time and insights in answering these questions.
You're welcome. I look forward to doing this again.
All right, for Lloyd Spencer, I'm Stuart Smith. Thanks so much for tuning in today.